neuroscience. He'll be presenting the recent and accumulating evidence that supports the involvement of the cerebellum in cognition, social, and emotional behaviors. Please welcome Dr. Denis Alemi.
Good. All right, so happy to be here. It's stress to come after all these guys who are brilliant and those who are going to come tomorrow. And it was a stress to prepare this whole thing. So why is this important to us? To talk about cerebellum, to talk about behavior, to talk about cognition. Because we are agents of change. As a chiropractors, we bring back movement. We bring back movement to the body, we bring back movement to the joints, and we think that this movement does something to the brain. Just a few weeks ago, I had a patient to come in. She's a head of project at a big company, and she came in for some headaches, migraines, and neck pain. And 2 weeks after, I was asking her, so how's it going? And she was like, oh, it's great. The pain is much less. I don't have any of those headaches that I had literally almost every day. And the other thing, and they always say, I don't know if it's you, is I'm feeling much more zen. I'm cool. Things that used to get on my nerves are not bothering me as much anymore. So at the office, I'm just like really more relaxed. Which is saying, she was almost saying that it's not such a good thing because I'm head of projects, that I said I need to put pressure on the team, but I'm just being more relaxed. So we want to know more about it. We used to talk about, because I did the neurology program years ago with Professor Carrick, and I still continue doing a lot of these things in US. And we used to talk about what we do to the brain function, to the cortical function, to the prefrontal cortex. And we're starting to realize that actually it might not just be the cortex, but there's probably more to that. So we're going to talk about cerebellum, cognition, motor control, because that's what we know it does, cognitive control, implications in psychiatric disorders, and maybe implications for us as practitioners. This year marks the 500-year anniversary of death of Leonardo da Vinci in France. And actually, for those who want to see some stuff from him, there's a great expo at Louvre right now. You have to get tickets beforehand, but it's actually definitely worth it, the paintings, to go and see that. So the legend is that in 1504, Leonardo da Vinci made a wax casting of inside the cranium and discovered two small brain hemispheres. And this was his interest for him. It was interesting for him because they seem symmetrical and interconnected with both hemispheres. And he called them cerebellum, or the little brain. So that's probably where it comes, the name it comes from that, which means little brain in Latin. This little brain, which accounts for 10% of the whole brain, actually contains, some people say 50, more people are now saying probably 80% of brain cells. So it's actually probably something very important that in that small piece, there's so much brain cells. In 19th century, Marie-Jean-Pierre Florence observed that damage to the vestibular system and its connections to the cerebellum resulted in lack of coordination and fine-tuned muscle movements, which are called ataxia. And also dysmetria, which was the impairment of the timing. That's when you do the overshoot or the undershoot, when you do some of the movements with your hand, with your legs, or even with the eyes, or even in language. So they saw that removing the cerebellum doesn't stop the movement, but alters the coordination of the movement. So Till recently, this is what we knew about cerebellum, which is cerebellum is motor control, motor fine-tuning. For some of those who come from US, maybe they had to go through some of these tests. I've done it when I was there. We don't have that in France. They just make you go over the small tests for the breath analyzer. So this is what we knew about the cerebellum, which is, do they have good motor control? And it was known that cerebellum receives lots of inputs from different cortical regions, but we thought that the projections from the cerebellum was mainly to the motor cortex via the thalamus. New imagery techniques are showing us that the cerebellum actually sends projections to many different regions of the cortex. We'll talk about it a little bit later, but what's most interest of us is prefrontal and parietal cortex. So the thought that the cerebellum was only motor function actually started to change in 1998 with some guy called Schmahmann from Harvard Medical School, who started talking the first about cerebral cognitive affective syndrome, or CCAS. And because of him, actually, they call it also the Schmahmann's syndrome. So he said that cerebral damage can result in a series of deficits in cognitive control, cognitive domains of executive function. We'll come a little bit more over that, which is multitasking, planning, organizing. There's spatial cognition, language, behavior, and abstract reasoning, and regulation of the emotion. Since then, there's been more and more research on that. Still the beginning, but there's starting to be more. And actually, in 2018, Marikel showed that actually, probably only 20% of the cerebellum is related to motor control. And 80% of the function of the cerebellum activity is about abstract thinking, about planning, emotion, memory, and language. And through different researchers, we'll go over some of them, they have actually started to say that the cerebellum, the altered cerebral function is related to addiction, to autism, to schizophrenia, to depression, obsessive compulsive disorder, and ADHD. What they found also is that the structure of the anatomy of the cerebellum is very individual. So you can correlate individual differences in brain structure with individual differences in behavior, skills, and capability. Most of us think that who you are is actually what's going on in your brain, in the cortex of your brain. Again, we talked about prefrontal cortex. Now they're saying actually it's probably a lot of involvement in the cerebellum that is making you who you are. They also saw that activity in cortical areas associated with higher cognitive function in the brain cortex was followed by several hundred milliseconds in the cerebellum. So that they think that the nascent thoughts, the thoughts that you start to think about something, are actually being relayed to the cerebellum and then comes back to the cortex it goes to the cerebellum for pre-approval before going back to the cortex. And what they're saying is that when we do some things when we are drinking, and there's some things that we look back and say, well, that was really stupid, is because cerebellum, which is actually the area that is being targeted by alcohol, is not doing its function, is not doing the editing of the thoughts. And that's why these people would do or say things that they could regret, or that could be funny later on YouTube. So the cerebellum integrates internal, external stimuli and modulates the appropriate responses to maintain a homeostasis state without conscious awareness. So it's a dampener of how we're going to react, how we're going to bring out our output. The theory of thought implies that when the cerebellum is dysfunctional, the clinical manifestation, what we call the dysmetria, is going to be consistent across all domains. In the same way as the cerebellum regulates the rate, the force, the rhythm, the accuracy of the movements, it would regulate the speed, capacity, consistency, and appropriateness of, again, mental or cognitive processes. So they're saying that dysmetria from lesions of cerebral motor regions manifest in cerebral motor syndromes, and like gait ataxia, limb ataxia, dysarthric speech. And the cerebellovestibular regions, when there's a deficit, they do the cerebellovestibular syndrome. And when we have these in the cognitive limbic regions, then we have the cerebellar deficits, as we call now the CCAS, the cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome. So what is it? Well, when there is a cerebellar cognitive affective syndrome, there are deficits in executive function. Some people went over what the executive function. We're going to go a little bit more inside and to understand what it is. So when there's a deficit in executive function, there's impaired working memory. This is the short memory that you need to be able to reason, to be able to make decisions, for the behavior. You can test that by asking the person to just give you as many names or objects, terms in 1 minute. So this is actually we do tests also for prefrontal cortex. So it's actually a combination of what's going on in the cerebellum and the prefrontal cortex. The set shifting. This is the ability to shift your attention from one task to another task and to do that change. You can see that deficit if you have worked with ADHD, Asperger kids, just go tell a kid who has Asperger that the plans have changed and look at the reaction. Recently, I had a kid who was coming, it was for the first visit. I know the grandparents are patients. And they were late. They were like 15, 20 minutes late. And when they get there, I like my patients to be on time. So I'm like, what's going on? And they said, well, I'm sorry, but we had a huge fuss. He made a huge fuss. This is a 5-year-old kid, extremely brilliant. Since I don't know when, he's doing mathematics, calculus, and stuff that nobody, it's not his age range. But what happened is that when they were taking the train, I'm close to Eiffel Tower, so they have to take the subway that goes above the ground. He got panicked. He started actually making a huge fuss because he used to do that with his grandfather, to come and go to the Eiffel Tower. So coming here with his mother was not normal for him. So he started making a huge fuss, and actually the mom was saying that we had to get out of the train to just sit down for 10 minutes and calm him down before we can come here. This is actually what we see a lot of times also when we see autistic kids who come in. The first time is just extremely difficult because it's a new thing. They cannot change their mind on what they're going to see and what they're seeing now. So this is the set shifting. The verbal fluency manifesting as telegraphic speech, like cupcake, give, or daddy, here, instead of having a whole sentence. And we test that by asking how many words from one category they can do in 1 minute. For example, give me as many names you can of flowers that will start with an F, something like that. The problem solving, the multitasking, the planning, so these are all the things that we do. The sequencing, which is being able to understand the story, what's starting it, what's the middle of it, what's the end of it, and be able to plan also things for them, and organizing. There's also deficits in visual-spatial cognition, which usually enables us to perceive and interact with our visual world, such as the ability to recognize the food on the plate, to the visual skills needed to find our favorite product at the supermarket, to understand that I have to get down at this station or bus station to go to my chiropractor's office. Do you have patients who miss that station, that stop? So when there are deficits in these problems, we get what they call visual spatial disintegration, which is manifesting as deficit in copying and conceptualizing drawn figures. You can see that when you ask them to draw a cube on their own, and this is probably what you can get. Or you're going to ask them to copy a drawn cube and see what they do, how they do that. Or maybe some of the writings problems that we see with some of these kids. And there's also simultaneous, I didn't even know that name exists, which is actually the perception is limited to one thing, one object, or one side. If you ask a person like that to explain this, they're just going to look at one part of it and say, okay, there's water coming down from here. And they cannot conceptualize the whole thing that's going on in this kitchen. And then there's deficits in language, which, for example, agrammatism, which is telegraphic speech. Again, when you ask about a picture when the children playing in the park, and they're not going to be able to explain and put words on it, but just going to be trees, children running, something like that. Meidonomia, which is type of an aphasia when they cannot find the words. Usually, I do that a lot. I can describe what I'm talking about, but I cannot find that specific word in one language or the other. Dysprosodia is when they don't have the melody, the intonation, the pauses when they're talking, just all monotonous. And it's my geography teacher when I was, I don't know what age, and it was like everyone was sleeping at the end of the class. And you have deficits in emotion affect, which is seen by disinhibition, impulsivity, some regressive and childhood behavior, and obsessive compulsive disorders. Sorry, did I miss something here? Oh, there's something that is not showing. Huh? No. There's il y avait un tableau. Okay. Well, there was a table that was on this page. I don't know where it went, which actually shows that from a neuropsychiatric perspective, we see deficits in 5 core features, which are deficit in attentional control, in emotional control, in autism spectrum, psychosis spectrum symptoms, and deficient social skills. So basically what they see is that there's a lot of either exaggerated hypermetric cognitive behaviors or diminished hypermetric responses. For example, either they react extremely violently to a news or to something that they didn't like, or they're just apathic, they don't have much of a reaction, they don't have that oomph to start something, to do something, and to maintain attention. Vagus nerve stimulation, I'm definitely willing to hear what we're going to talk about tomorrow, but also that has been shown to facilitate plasticity memory in animal models. It has also shown to have an effect on cerebellum blood flow, activity, and disorders. Again, these are the things that vagus nerve stimulation, probably going to, again, someone has more information on that tomorrow, but this is something that we use at the office and we do with external vagus stimulation. But we combine that with other things also. Music training, induced neuroplasticity, cerebellar improvement of executive function and working memory. So that also can have an effect. Adjustments, do they have an effect? Again, if exercise has an effect, adjustments might have an effect. Do they? I don't know. Some guys, some people from, I don't know, some far, far away country, they talked about that. They said maybe because cervical spine manipulation in a subclinical neck pain group leads to a pattern of cerebellum modulation more similar to a non-neck pain group. So when they did that adjustment, they have actually an activity that is more much of a normal activity in the cerebellum. Huh. Same guys again. Neck pain may change cerebellum motor cortex interaction. The change to facilitation suggests that spinal manipulation may reverse inhibitory effects of neck pain. There's another guy, so not the same guys anymore, 2018, Ellingson et al., they showed that the spinal manipulation therapy reduced not only patients' clinical back pain, but also the aversiveness of the observed back straining exercises, meaning the fear and expected pain. So they also saw changes in the posterior insular, the superior temporal, and the cerebellum with the adjustments. So we might have actually an effect on that. Moser et al., 2019. These guys actually did something which probably is of interest to Dr. Klum, who's going to be talking tomorrow. And they saw that no significant changes within the cerebral hemodynamics following cervical manipulation or maximal neck rotation. So they're saying that probably some of these effects are not due to problems with the adjustments. But the other thing that they saw is that there is an increased functional connectivity after adjustments to different areas of the brain, including, again, cerebellum. Okay. Great. Oh, come on. So what can we do in our office? Well, there's a lot of things that we can do. We do the adjustments. That's one thing. We give them exercises. We give oxygen, breathing. We give them balance exercises. We give them rhythmic exercises, eye exercises, hand and eye coordination, complex movement, vestibular stimulation. There's a lot of things that we can do as a practitioner to be able to work with these patients who have brain or cerebellar disorders. We get a lot of kids. We have a whole program for them, and they go through different stations doing different kind of things. And when you have done the exam, then we know what areas that we want to work on, and these are some of the things that we work with them. So to finish, again, our role as a healthcare practitioner, what is it? I think it's to better understand what we do. I've been doing the neurology with Kirk for 20-something years, 24 years now. And we have talked about a lot of things that we do in the brain. Now we have some people who actually are doing the research, and they're showing, well, maybe what we were talking about for a long time. And we were seeing the results in the office. Not only the chiropractic neurologists. Chiropractors have been seeing this for more than 100 years. So these people are saying, okay, maybe actually what the clinicians are saying are worth putting research and see if we can see how this is working. So what we can do is try to better understand, read some of these articles, and actually support their research. And then, again, offer some brain-based solutions. The adjustments could be part of it. Exercises, we do some of them inside in the office, some of them get them to go do it at home. Nutrition, I just have like 2 more minutes. Maybe I'm going to talk about that also. Nutrition at Cerebellum is a huge, huge, huge thing. If you want guys listen to Denis Alemi and some of the guys who work in those fields, we talk a lot about the gluten today is like a huge, huge thing, fat. What's the reality of it? But the problem is not the gluten in itself. The problem is that a lot of people eat gluten, they don't have any problems. The problem is that some of these people with neurological problems, they have also some barriers that are not functioning. When these barriers are not functioning, that gluten goes through the cerebral barrier, and that's when it starts creating reaction, immune reaction. And the thing is, actually, I didn't find the article, but I saw that article like a few weeks ago. I can find that for you guys. Again, Denis was talking about it years ago. But again, they saw what's going on with the gluten, the form of the molecule, and what's going on in the cerebellum. And so what happens is that when these barriers are not tight, functioning, then when the gluten goes in the cerebellum, in the brain areas, then the immune reaction starts to attacking cerebellum. And that's why we are probably having some of these effects with these kids, ADHD, autism, all these things. And when they take off the gluten off for these kids, they start having some improvements because we started reducing that immune reaction. So again, when it's a very difficult presentation to talk only about cerebellum because there's so many connections to so many other things. But we as clinicians, when we're working on them, then we are working on different things. We're chiropractors, we're going to do adjustments. We're going to talk about exercises, but we're going to also talk about nutrition and try to have a global view on these patients and what we can do with them. So again, just to finish, I'm really happy to be able to be here with some of these guys who do some terrific work and probably could help us, again, to understand a little bit more and have more applications for what we do every day in the office with our patients. Thank you.